Okay, so welcome back everyone. Week 4, kind of wrapping up week 4. It's kind of cool being at the end of the week, especially on my Friday classes, because it's it feels like we're just kind of rolling into the weekend on Thursdays. Historically, we don't have a lot of classes on Fridays, so I'm sure for many of you, this is the last day of your kind of academic school week. So tomorrow, starts the weekend. So for me, not so much. I got to teach tomorrow, and I got to work on Saturday too. So I still got a lot of work in front of me. But for you guys, woo, have fun playing Grand Theft Auto 5. It's gonna be pretty epic. So today we're gonna pick up right where we left off last week. We concluded our conversation last week by really kind of digging in and talking about some modeling tools and some techniques that allowed us to create the geometry for our corkboard. This week, we're going to pick up right where we left off, and we're going to start to focus on the textures and the materials that we need to apply on our corkboard to really make it come to life. Now, for me, this is kind of one of my favorite parts inside of the entire 3D process. Our pipeline allows us to be incredibly creative during the materials and texture stage. In many ways, this is where our model truly comes to life. So up until now, it's just kind of like this, seemingly gray thing inside of our environment. The moment we start adding materials and textures is the moment we really start to understand how the lights inside of our environment are going to be interacting with these surfaces. We start to get a better idea of the characteristics of these surfaces, and we start to really truly define what this object looks like from a visual perspective. So it's an exciting stage. However, it is wrought with disaster. There are landmines all over the place. Applying materials and texture is not difficult, but it's not easy either. It's going to take some practice in order for us to get really good at this stage in the rendering pipeline. Okay? To be entirely honest with you, people dedicate their entire careers on applying materials and texturing and really understanding the rendering pipeline. So you can spend a tremendous amount of time and effort really digging into the rendering pipeline and getting some really rock star results. Okay? So today we're going to take it really slow. We're going to do it one kind of baby step at a time as we kind of navigate through the treacherous waters of the shader tree. You guys are going to love working in the shader tree. I think the shader tree is intelligently designed. It behaves and operates very similarly to a lot of some of the other standard pipelines that we're used to working with. Now, if I remember, this class has a lot of experience inside of Photoshop, right? A lot of Photoshop users in here. Well, if you have a little bit of Photoshop experience, this is going to feel very comfortable for you because the guys down at Luxology have modeled their shader tree around the layers palette over in Photoshop. Okay, so it's going to be cool. You guys are going to like it when we dig into it, but there are a lot of little things that we got to go over between now and then. Okay, so let's just check out our course page. FYI, and it looks like there's a little bit of confusion on this. I always post our course week information on Tuesdays because I have a Tuesday section of this exact same class. Okay, so stay on top of which course the assignments are coming in. Okay, or coming from. The most recent course page is always going to be at the top. So by the time you guys roll in on Thursday, obviously the Tuesday section has already been completed, and you're going to see this week's stuff, yesterday and Tuesday if you're looking. Okay, so stay on top of it. You have to manage this. Okay, you have to manage this. So this week, we're going to be exploring the process of creating materials and textures inside of Modo. We're going to extend our corkboard project by applying some really great materials and textures all across our scene. So if we jump in, let's just take a look at the homework. 10,000-yard description really fast. As I mentioned, this week, you're going to be putting stuff on your corkboard. Woo! Okay? So your job this week is to go in and find posters and images and to populate your posters with all these different textures. You're also going to find some images that you can put on the corkboard itself. You're going to figure out a way to make the border of your corkboard look like wood grain. And of course, the little simple scene that your corkboard is existing within also needs to have a texture. Okay? I've given you some really great examples of what I'm looking for at the conclusion of this process. And ultimately, by the end of today's conversation, you'll be able to do all of the stuff that you see on the screen right here. Okay? So that's what's going to be on the homework. As always, if you need a little refresher as to what we've covered in class, and if you would like to see me completing this week's homework assignment, time-lapse video is an excellent resource to get a little refresher of the sequence. I'll be the first one to admit that 9 times out of 10, the hardest part for beginners is just remembering and kind of committing to memory the sequence of steps that we have to go through to complete these projects. Those time-lapse videos are a great visual refresher. Our lab assignment this week is going to get our hands dirty with the process of applying materials and textures. You're going to have some time in class today to start working on this project. I'm giving you this very simple lighthouse scene, and when you open up this project file for the first time, you're going to notice that it looks nothing like any of the images that you see here. It's gray. There are no materials. There are no textures. Your job in the lab assignment is to go through and apply a whole suite of materials and textures to make our little lighthouse scene come to life.
So we're not modeling that.
You're not modeling it. If you already, you can find the model file in the resource section. Okay. So under important documents, there it is, lab project file. Okay. That's the file that you're going to want to download when we get there. Please hold off on this until we get to the lab portion of this class. I know sometimes I give you these project files and they turn into these awesome little toys that you guys want to play with like right now and you want to explore it. Just wait, okay? We have a lot of heavy lifting to do between now and then, and I want to make sure we're all kind of walking down this path together, okay? In addition, on the Resources tab, I've placed, probably 8 or 9 videos here that are directly going to reflect the content in today's class. So you have the lecture, the live stream, and these dedicated videos that cover this content in its totality, okay? So please use these as reference. They're fantastic. I was about to say they're fantastically designed. I made them, so I'm a little bit biased, but they are pretty good little videos that describe the basic, fundamental principles and steps and sequences for this type of work, okay? So use the videos. Use the videos. They're going to be, I think, of a very large assistance moving forward. Okay. Questions and comments? Everyone ready? Want to jump in? Let's do it. All right, let me open up the Modo, and we can start working, okay? So today, we're not going to talk about modeling at all. I'm going to construct a very, very simple scene here in a moment that we're going to use as the foundation for exploring the process of applying materials and textures in our scene. So today is all about materials and textures. Not really going to cover a lot of modeling stuff. I think I'm going to start off by, let's see here. I think I'm going to start off and just start adding a couple of basic shapes into my scene. So here's a cool little cube. All right, rock and roll. There we go. And let's see. I want to have a cube. Let me just move this out of the way because I want to make some other shapes in here as well. I'm also going to add a sphere. Let's move that out of the way. And let's see. I also add a cylinder into the mix. There we go. And, well, why not? Let's just add a cone. Cones are always kind of fun. So let's just add a cone. There we go. And I want to make all these things appear as though they're sitting on top of some sort of ground plane. So I'm just going to grab the cube tool and draw out a very just large plane. There we go. And in my polygonal selection mode, I want to move that plane vertically down on the y-axis. There we go. Let's just check its alignment here real fast. A little too high. Perfect. Okay. And this cone seems a little bit big, so I'm going to just make it small and move it down so it's just kind of chilling right in front of my simple little scene. There we go. That's all we're going to do. That's my scene. This is the scene that we're going to be working with over the next hour or so. So if you'd like to follow along, I would encourage you to make a very simple scene using the unit primitive tools that we've been exploring over the last couple of weeks. All right. The rest of today is going to be spent inside the Render tab. Okay. Now check this out. This is our new home, this Render tab, for the remainder of the day. The Render tab really gives us access to some really important properties, some panels, and some workflows that makes texturing our scene elements really easy. So let me jump over into the Render tab real fast, and we can start to explore the basic user interface of this really cool environment. So here we go, the Render tab. Now the Render tab is broken up into what I would call 4 major areas. Now we went over this a couple weeks ago, but it's so important that I think we're going to kind of refresh our memories a little bit. Okay, now help me out. What is that big window in the upper left-hand corner responsible for? Does anyone remember its name? The one with the white cylinder in it? Does anyone remember its name and what its role is? It's the preview window. What is the preview window going to give us? What is the preview window going to do for us? So this is the preview window. Preview, okay? What is preview going to do? Say again? What? Huh? Yeah, absolutely. This is a window into our final render, okay? What you see is what you get. If what you see in that window is a direct representation of what is actually going to be rendered in your scene. Now, are we rendering our scene when we see that window? No, okay? It's just a real-time preview, okay? And it's an awesome real-time preview. I think you're going to love working inside the preview window. And in many ways, the preview window is worth the price of admission into the Modoverse, okay? It is awesome. I wish all applications had a preview window like this. It is very, very special, okay? There's a lot of technology in the back end of Modo that makes this preview window kind of the coolest thing on the market. Now, the preview window really is a direct representation of the perspective that our render camera is looking at through our scene, okay? Now, I've changed this bottom section here to my preset browser. I was doing some work yesterday on some professional client work, and this is probably what you're going to see down in your window, okay? Notice that the bottom section is broken into a whole series of tabs. I'm in the Model Single tab. Now, this OpenGL viewport that we gained down here at the bottom is really quite invaluable to have because it gives us access to our scene. Okay, I can very quickly navigate, see all my little items. In addition, we're also getting indicators for the direct light sources in our scene. And I think I've turned off my cameras. So let me turn on my camera. There we go. Aha. And we also get an icon for our render camera. The Modo rendering engine is kind of reliant and centered around a camera, okay? And that camera behaves like, real-world cameras, okay? It's pretty cool. But there's a link between the position and rotation of this camera and what we see up there in the preview window. If I wanted to change my orientation within the scene and take a different picture of my little unit primitive scene here, I would need to change the location and the rotation values of my camera to do that, right? How can we do that, though? How can we change what the camera sees inside the preview window? By rotating on it, by clicking on the camera and rotating it, absolutely. Now, we got to keep in mind that all cameras inside of Modo are classified as items, okay? So they're not polygons, they're not edges, they are an item. So it's really important that we start to participate in that item workflow. So we've got to make sure that we're in item mode. Once we're in item mode, let me just click on it real fast. We can grab our camera, and we get the same rollover colors and selection colors that we had before. And our move and rotate tools are going to give us the effect that we really desire. So if I move my camera, you can see our preview window updating up top. So maybe I want to see kind of like the sphere a little bit. So oops, I dropped it out on accident. There we go. Let me grab the rotation tool, rotate my camera around, and now I'm starting to see a different perspective in my scene. Okay? It's kind of a lot of work, though, just to move and rotate a camera around our scene. Is there a better way to do this? Yeah, absolutely. And this is why the preview window is so rad. So we can use the same viewport navigation controls that we've been using since day one in here inside the preview window to rotate and move our camera. Now check this out. Watch what happens downstairs in my OpenGL viewport when I start orbiting and panning around inside my preview. You're going to start to see my little camera dance around. Oops. Let me oops. Hit the wrong key. Here we go. Check it out. I'm going to use the orbit command inside of preview, so I'm holding down my option key, and I'm orbiting. Look what's happening to my camera. It's physically changing its location within the scene. So when you're orbiting, and when you're zooming in and zooming out, or you're panning left and right, up and down, in the preview window, you're actually changing the location of your render camera inside of our three-dimensional space. Okay? So with that said, I'm going to use my viewport navigation controls and just kind of zip around my scene to find kind of a really cool shot that I can use to illustrate and demonstrate the process of applying material and textures in my scene. And this is what I have. Just a very simple little setup, and I can see all four of my unit primitives just chilling there at the origin of my scene. Okay. All right. Now that we have kind of an understanding of the relationship between the bottom portion of our interface and the top portion of our interface, we can start doing some actual work. Okay. Now the work of applying materials and textures begins and ends in what's called the shader tree. The shader tree is an important critical element inside the Modo rendering pipeline, and you can find the shader tree over here. So it's this thing right there in 701. That's your shader tree. And specifically what you're looking for in the tabs is this little word that says shading. Okay? This is where you're going to be doing all of your work. Okay? This is where we're physically going to get access to the materials that are influencing the colors of our objects, the textures that we're going to be placing on our objects, and other really fancy things that will make our objects really just sing. Okay? So start looking for the shading tree, the shader tree, excuse me. The shader tree has a couple icons on it that make it unique. Let me zoom in a little bit, and we can start taking a look at it. Okay? So if you check it out, you know you're in the shader tree when it says View Shader Tree, and you see all the different shading items down below. So this is structurally different from the item list, which is showing you all of the different items within your scene. This is not showing that, although there are a few items that cross between the two lists, specifically the lights. Okay, you'll see you have a little folder there for lights. Okay, they travel between the two different interfaces. The shader tree, if we take a look at it, oops. The shader tree is really broken up into these sections, okay? And to understand how the Modo rendering engine works, we have to understand how the Modo rendering engine is evaluating all of these items in the list. And more importantly, which order it's evaluating all of these items in the list, okay? The Modo shader tree works off of a very simple principle. It's going to start at the bottom, work its way up towards the top. So the flow of information inside the shader tree is always going to start down at the bottom of the list and then go this way. Okay? We're always flowing up. So the elements at the bottom of the list are absolutely going to influence how the items at the top of the list are going to be drawn in the final render. Okay? Now for today, I want you just to basically ignore that FX button. Okay? That's something that you'll only really start to play around with as you get into GCOM 410. Modo has an awesome effects rendering engine that allows us to do like smoke and flames and particles and things like that. That section or those types of effects are going to be placed inside that FX render item. Okay. But starting going up from there, we have a really important one, and this is our environment. Okay. The environment plays a big role inside of our rendering engine because it's going to tell us. It's going to give us some information on how the background colors are going to influence all the foreground colors. Okay? The environment, as you get more accustomed to working inside the shader tree, is going to allow you to create almost photoreal effects quickly. You'll see this in action a little bit later. Okay? We can, if you really think about it, the environment is kind of like a beach ball. Okay? Now my son's 1 year old and we have a beach ball at home, so I apologize. Like all of my metaphors today are going to be things that my son is doing right now, and he loves this darn beach ball, right? It's just a beach ball, right? But it entertains him for hours on end, okay? So imagine your three-dimensional scene like a beach ball, right? But your beach ball isn't facing outwards, okay? All the little colored checkered squares on your beach ball are facing inwards, okay? Facing inwards. And your scene is existing in the center of the beach ball, okay? So if we were to look out, we would see the inside edge of the beach ball, okay? We can place a texture map on the inside edge of our beach ball to make it look as though, we're having a sky inside of our environment. A photograph. Photographs are often placed in our environments to achieve that look of photorealism, okay? We'll talk about this a little bit later on today. So our environments are going to give us access to some background information that's going to help determine how our objects are going to be drawn in the scene. And with this new technology in the Modo shader tree, it's going to influence specifically the colors of the lights that are going to be influencing how our objects are going to be drawn. Okay, it's called high dynamic range imaging You're going to love it. It's changed our workflow, and it's really, really neat. Okay, let's keep going. So after the computer is done evaluating all the environments, it's going to start looking at the next item up. And in our case, it's going to be all the lights. The lights inside of our scene are going to produce a number of really important effects for us. Primarily, they're going to cast direct illumination onto the objects in our scene. Okay, and what this really means is that we're going to resemble, or they're going to resemble, the real-world lights that we're used to working with out here in, good old planet Earth. Okay, Modo at the core has what's called a physically based rendering engine. So the lights inside of our rendering engine behave and operate like the real-world lights. Case in point, the default light type that comes with every new Modo scene is called the directional light. And here, I think next week, we're going to have a very long, lengthy conversation about the differences between all of these lights. So you'll discover next week when we talk about lights that a directional light kind of simulates the sun. It's a never-ending plane, an infinite plane of light coming from a very specific spot inside of our three-dimensional scene. Okay? Well, that infinite plane of light, like the sun, is going to cast a shadow. Well, which direction is that shadow going to be cast in? Well, that's determined by the orientation of the light in the scene. Lights also have color. So when we start combining that direct illumination color with our environments, we're going to get a really kind of cool, unique result. So the lights are going to have a big influence on how our objects are drawn in our scene. And it's important that the Modo rendering engine know that pretty early on in its evaluation, so that when it starts looking at the render item, the big purple sphere, it understands the role of the light, the orientation of the light, and which light type is being infused inside of our scene. Okay, so we're going to skip over the library folder for the time being. This is a new one that just popped in 701. This allows us to have a library of material presets that we can use over and over and over again on different items within our render scene, or excuse me, within the shader tree. Okay, but primarily where we're going to be spending the most time is inside this render item. Okay, it's the big purple sphere that says render, and there's a tremendous amount of content that's inside this render area. This is where the lion's share of the work that you're going to do is going to be. It's inside this section. And by default, this item is expanded when you first go into the shader tree. I've collapsed it just to show you all the different item types. But let's expand it and take a look at what's happening on the inside. So if I click on this little dark arrow, check it out. We have some components of our render item. These components play a really critical role, and we're going to talk about each one of these here momentarily, but let's talk about the process of evaluation. When we're rendering, we often have to think like a machine, right? We have to understand how the rendering engine is working to achieve that final result. Like the other areas of our shader tree, this portion of the shader tree is still evaluating from the bottom going up top. So the first thing it's going to look at when it starts physically evaluating the colors of all the pixels, or excuse me, colors of all the polygons in our scene, is the base material. The base material has an important role. We're going to come back to that. But the 10,000-yard description of a material is something, the material is what ultimately determines the surface characteristics of our polygons. Okay? More on that later. Okay? Think like it determines what color your car is. Okay? The material is responsible for that. Right above the base material, you can see we have a base shader. Shaders play another really important role inside of the Modo rendering engine. But for today, I just want us to focus on visibility. Okay? The shaders are ultimately going to determine a number of things, but for us in this class, it's going to determine visibility of very specific items. Okay? As we get more accustomed to working inside the shader tree, and it's become more advanced, the role of the shaders are going to change. Okay? All right. Immediately above the base shader, you can see that we have two unique icons and two unique elements inside the Modo shader tree. These are called render outputs, and I want you to look very closely at their icon. They have these cool little Mona Lisa, like picture icons, right? Whenever you see a Mona Lisa inside of Modo, you need to think picture, okay? These are called render outputs, and physically, their responsibility inside the render engine is to draw an image, okay? And if you look, whenever we hit the render button, we have two render outputs, so we're actually asking our Modo rendering engine to draw two pictures for us simultaneously at the exact same time. Okay? The render outputs are physically an image that's going to be generated once we hit that render button. Okay? The final color output is a direct representation of the color information that you see in the preview window. So right now, as I'm looking around the classroom, I can see a number of you guys have orientated your cameras to create some really cool shots inside your preview window. If you're at the render button right now, the final color output would take over and it would show you what you see in that preview window. Okay? The alpha output is incredibly important. We're going to talk a lot about the alpha output in the upcoming weeks. But ultimately, its role inside the shader tree and the rendering engine is to enable or to give us access to transparency. Okay? It's going to give us transparency channels for us to work with, like over in Photoshop and After Effects and things like that. For the most part, we're not going to work with the alpha output too much in this class. But I think if you're trying to incorporate 3D graphics inside of other applications like Photoshop or After Effects, working with your alpha output is critical. Okay? More on that later. All right, and last but certainly not least, we have the render item itself. Nested inside the render item, see this little plus sign right here? If we click on it, bam, there's our camera. Okay? So we have access to our camera and a whole suite of options that will allow us to change how our camera works to resemble the counterparts that we have out in the real world. Our cameras, our digital cameras here in Modo, are almost a direct representation of how actual cameras work. So we get like f-stops and film back sizes and different types of lenses and what have you. It's pretty neat. It gives us a lot of control. And then last but certainly not least, we have the render item itself. This guy, the purple sphere with the word render onto it. You're going to be going in and out of this one a lot because ultimately that icon, that purple sphere, is going to give you access to a number of back-end settings that we need to change. Okay? You can find all the settings for all of these options. Okay? For all of these, if you click on any one of these things inside of our shader tree, you can find all of its properties over here on the right-hand side inside the Properties tab. Now, if you're used to working in Modo from an earlier version of the application, this is a big detraction from what we had up until about 4 months ago. So they've kind of tweaked the interface a little bit for the better. I think I kind of like it. Took me a little getting used to, but now I'm digging it. We have almost the entire right-hand portion of the interface now dedicated towards that Properties tab. And you can see that whenever I go up and down my shader tree, that Properties tab is going to change to reflect the item that I have selected. Okay? So you're going to be going in and out of these Properties tabs a lot, so get used to seeing them, get used to going over there. Okay? Questions so far? Everyone good? Kind of understanding it? So we have the preview window here in the center. So this is all preview up in here. This is going to be the OpenGL viewport, and we have some other things. As you get more advanced, you'll start to understand the role of the UV texture window. We're going to use some presets today. We also have the gradient editor, so it's given us access to some other important interface elements, most of which we're just not quite ready for yet, but just know that they're docked down there in that tab. However, on the right side of the scene, we're going to see some interface elements that we're already accustomed to seeing. Of course, we have the item list over here. Last week, we spent a lot of time in the item list duplicating things, so we still get access to that, which is kind of neat. And then, of course, there's the new one, the most important one for the rendering pipeline, and that's the shader tree, which is all of this stuff down here. Of course, any selection that we make in either the item list or the shader tree is going to populate our Properties tab, so all this information is going to flow over to this portion of the interface. Okay? Now, all of this stuff up here, just forget that that's there. Okay? Just ignore it for the time being. When you get into GCOM 410, our advanced class, you'll start to really understand the role of those buttons and how to use them in a production environment. Ultimately, what those little buttons in the upper right-hand corner of the render tab allow us to do is to render out different passes. Okay? Different passes from our environment. And these passes will then be ultimately composited together either in Photoshop if you're doing a still image or After Effects if you're doing a QuickTime movie file. Okay? Incredibly powerful. I think it's really neat, actually. I've been digging it very much, but that's what that part of the interface is responsible for doing. All right. Questions? Everyone good? Okay. I want to spend some time today talking about the base material. Okay? The base material is hands down probably one of the most important elements inside of the shader tree. If you look carefully at my preview window, and let me see if I can make this bigger. Yeah, there we go. If you look closely at the preview window, what color are all of our polygons? White, okay? Now, what is ultimately determining its color? It's not magic. There's got to be something inside of our rendering engine that's telling it to be white. Nathan? The material, and specifically the base material. If you look over in your shader tree, that base material is ultimately responsible for determining the surface characteristics of every single polygon in the scene. Okay? This is the default. This is the default material that ships with every scene that you open and you create. And I think I need to underscore this. The base material is responsible for shading everything. Okay? Everything gets applied automatically to the base material. Okay? Case in point, let me show you what I'm talking about. I have my base material selected, and with it selected, all of its properties come to the surface over here in the Properties tab. And don't worry, we're going to go through a number of these channels a little bit later, but for right now, just take a look at diffuse color. The diffuse color value ultimately determines the skin color, if you will, of our objects, and its color is white, which is why all of our polygons inside of our preview window are also showing up white. Okay? So if we were to change this, and knowing that it's responsible for shading everything, what do you think is going to happen if I changed it to like red? Everything's going to go red. Let's check it out. Okay? If I change my diffuse color value just by clicking on any one of these numbers, we're going to get the Modo color picker. We're going to talk about this as well here in a minute, so just hang tight if you have questions. And I'm just going to pick red. Boom. And you can see in the background that all of my polygons have gone red. Okay? Any new object that we automatically create in our scene is also automatically going to get assigned to the base material. Let's add something new in here. I want to add a donut into my scene, or a torus, depending on how you want to look at it, okay? So check this out. The moment I add a torus or any new geometry into my scene, it's automatically going to be assigned to our base material. Yoink! There it is, and there's the torus sitting on top of my cylinder, okay? Automatically got assigned to the base material. The base material shades everything. It's a global material that affects every single polygon in the scene, okay? It's a global shader. Global material, okay? Now this is really nice because we can affect all of our scene, all of the assets of our scene simultaneously. There are in certain situations, this becomes an incredibly invaluable resource for us going forward. But often we don't want to have everything be shaded, right? What if I want my cube to be blue, or my cylinder to be yellow, and my sphere to be green? What do I need to do? Huh?
Select the item.
We got to select it first. I love that. Absolutely. But ultimately, huh? Yeah, you guys are right. Absolutely. And ultimately what we need to do is that we need to create a custom material for just those polygons. And you guys were absolutely right. We have to start with the selection. Now this process begins and ends with a polygonal selection. So please make sure you're in your polygonal selection mode. This is not something we want to do at the moment in item mode, okay? So I'm going to jump over to my polygonal selection set at the top of the screen, and I'm going to reduce the size of my preview window so I get access to my OpenGL viewport downstairs, okay? And this is really the reason why we have access to our OpenGL viewport, so we can very quickly navigate into our scene, find the polygons that we want to create a material for, and assign the material. Inside of the render window, all of our selection sets are still alive and kicking. They're just right here, okay? The icons are a little bit smaller, a little bit more difficult to see, but they are still there inside of our scene. The third one, so that one right there, is going to be our Polygon Selection Set. So let's just go into it real fast. And I want to make a material for my cube. I want to double click on my cube, which selects the totality of that shape. And which keyboard shortcut am I going to press? M for material, okay? Hitting the M key on your keyboard is going to assign a new material to just those polygons, okay? Let's see it in action. I'm going to hit the M key, and we're going to get this new popover, the Polygon Set Material popover. Now, there's a couple little moving parts within inside this window that we need to look at. Specifically, we need to look at the name. If the guys at Luxology are listening to my live stream right now, please change this, okay? Instead of, when you see the word default, in your mind, you should be thinking base material, okay? If you assign this material to the default material, it's going to get assigned to the role of the base material, okay? Well, we don't want this. We don't want this shape, my little cube, to be influenced by the base material. I want it to be influenced by a new material, okay? So I'm gonna change my name here, and I think what did we say? We wanted it to be green, right? So let's just say green. And then we'll click on the color here. And here's my little crayon box. I like my little crayon box. And there we go. We'll just set it green, and then we'll hit OK. Now, I'm zoomed in at the point where we can't see what happened, but when I zoom out, you can see the effect, okay, the result of that operation. Now, some new things have changed over inside of our shader tree. Let's examine them. The moment we hit the M key, our shader tree expands a little bit. And it starts to bring to the surface some new elements. Check it out. All right. Okay. What's new? Yeah, we have another material within the scene. And more importantly, is that icon right above it. This guy. Let me just collapse that hierarchy for a second so we can take a look. The selected item that I have on my shader tree right now is called a material group or a material mask. And what we've done by hitting the M key is that we've created a folder, if you will, because it really is kind of like a folder. And very similar to that of Photoshop, whatever's in that folder is going to be applied to the polygons that we tagged to that folder, right? So when we selected our polygons in the scene and hit the M key, we told those polygons to only and only be influenced by that folder there, okay? In essence, what we've done is that we have extracted those polygons, in our case the cube, from being influenced by the base material, okay? We've kind of created a little bit of a mask, if you will, if you're used to working in Photoshop, okay? If we expand our material group and look at its components, check it out. Let's click on the arrow. Bam. It gets its own material, okay? Changing any of the parameters on this material are going to update just the polygons that were associated with that material group. So if I was to go in and change the color, the diffuse color value of that material, the cube is the only thing that's going to change, because the polygons on the cube are the only polygons that are associated with that folder, okay? Kind of make sense? So we're basically connecting polygons to very specific folders. The contents of that folder are going to determine how those polygons are shaded and drawn in our scene. Okay? Cool? Kind of get in the process a little bit? Let's do it a couple more times. Okay? Yeah, go ahead. It was right. I made it red. I mean the diffuse color. The diffuse color, because I think white's just the default color whenever you add a new material. But we changed it to the base material, we changed it to red. Correct. So it's not accessing that base material color anymore. We're creating a new material, so the default values of a material are now applied to that new material. Yeah. Okay. Let me zoom out. We're going to do it a couple more times here. All right, maybe we have, okay, I want to have my cylinder be yellow. Why not? Okay, so what do I need to do to my cylinder to make it yellow? Select it, absolutely. It all begins and ends with the selection. So if we double click on my cylinder, what keyboard shortcut am I going to press? M for material, okay? And if we look up into it, what am I going to do here? Change the name, absolutely. If we were to leave it as green, we would, in essence, be applying this cylinder to the existing green material. Okay? So let's do yellow. Change the color. to yellow. Or lemon, excuse me. And hit OK. Boom. Now our cylinder's yellow. Okay. Let's do it one more time. Let's do it on this sphere. Let's get this action going here. I want my sphere to be blue. So everything begins and ends with a selection. Select my sphere in the OpenGL viewport downstairs. Hit the M key. Apply to a blue, or just we'll call this material blue. Change the color. In user, I see what you were talking about before. I think I misstated what was happening. I think it's just grabbing the color that you previously selected. So we'll hit OK. We're on our way. Allows us to very, very quickly assign colors and specific materials to polygons in our scene. Now, there are some other ideas in here that we need to know about. We are tagging polygons, not items, okay? So you can only assign one material per polygon. So a polygon can't have two materials assigned to it, okay? A polygon cannot be influenced by the yellow material and the green material simultaneously, so it only gets one, okay? It only gets one. However, can we mix and match materials on a contiguous set of polygons, right? What if I want to have like every other row in my sphere be a different color? Can I do that? Absolutely, absolutely. So check it out. Let me go into my sphere here, and I'm just going to select some rows. Oops, some polygons here. I'll select that one. I won't select every other one, but I'll grab maybe the center three. Here's a great little trick. Notice that I've selected a couple polygons along a row. If I want the computer to automatically select the rest of the polygons on that row, hit the L key, L as in loop. And it automatically selects the rest of them along that loop. Yeah, I bet you wish some of you had told me, or I had told you that last week. That's okay. So there's my selection. I'm going to hit the M key yet again, and maybe we'll call this one purple. I don't know why. Or, shoot, let's just make it white. Ta-da! And now we have a blue and white striped sphere. Yeah, so the way it's really easy. You just have to select two or more polygons along that row, and then hit the L key for the computer to automatically select the rest of the polygons along that row for you. Makes a loop. Yep, it's called a loop selection. L for loop. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Our cone needs some love here. So let me go grab my cone and hit the M key, and I want my cone to be purple. There we go. And now we have custom materials for all the objects in our scene. Yeah? Uh-huh. Hold down shift. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Shift is going to add components to your selection. What's going to subtract components from your selection? Control, just like Photoshop. Okay. Now that we have a whole series of material groups applied in our scene, I want to revisit the idea that nothing is written in stone when it comes to the shader tree. Okay? These are all live, organic objects that are existing within our scene. So any change that we make to that material group is immediately going to be shown inside the preview window. Check it out. Maybe I don't want my base material to be red. Okay? So if I click on it, I'm going to change my diffuse color value back to white. We're on our way. Maybe I want to have, I don't know. Let's see. I have this white material here that's responsible for shading all the little stripes, all of these guys, all these little stripes on my sphere. Maybe I don't want them to be bright, white. Maybe I want them to be red. So if I go into its material, change its diffuse color value to red. Boom, we're on our way. Ta-da. However, I've made a change to what I would call the content of my material group. I have the group is called white, but the material is drawing it red. That is a disconnect in my brain, so I need to rename my material group. How do I do that? Has anyone stumbled upon how we can rename material groups? I love it. I love it. Right-click on the material group. Boom. Rename right there at the top, okay? and let's just call this red. Okay? Do you want to reassign materials with that name? Yes. And there it is. We just changed the name of the group. You can also employ the click, pause, click method. Okay? So this is kind of a Mac thing that we've been doing forever. Let me do it again so you guys can see what I'm talking about. If I was to left click on an object, left click, pause, and then click again, you see I can quickly rename that object kind of live without having to right click on it at all. Okay? All right. So there's my scene. It's starting to look pretty great. I'm happy with it. Yeah?
So if your object is blue and red, would that be two different things, or does it go in the same way?
Like my sphere? Yeah. So if you look carefully at what's going on here, I have two different material groups. Yeah. Two different material groups. Okay? I have a red material group, and then I have a blue material group. So two different layers, if you will, inside your shader tree. Absolutely. What you are, in fact, doing when you're creating these material groups is you are assigning polygons to that group, which is why if you want two polygons to have different colors, you have to have two different material groups. Okay? Okay. I mentioned before that the preview window is kind of the bee's knees. It is the coolest thing since sliced bread. And the preview window really kind of shows its awesomeness when we start clicking in it. Okay? We've been clicking in it already. We've been navigating around, changing our camera orientation just by using our standard viewport navigation controls. But we have more power inside of the shader or the preview window. Okay? And this is really where it separates itself from the pack, because other apps have a preview window, but no other app has an interactive preview window that's going to give you some feedback. I think I showed you last week or the week before my train, right? That train model that I made. That is an incredibly complex scene. I have hundreds of separate items and a tremendous amount, I see your hand, and a lot of polygons in the scene, okay? If you look at my shader tree, I think I got like 60 or 70 separate material groups that are influencing how my train is going to be, I see your hand, how my train is going to be shaded, okay? Let me show you a really cool trick. Navigating a shader tree that's got 50 or 60 material groups in it turns into a beast. Okay, and I'm horrible with lists. My brain does not consume lists. I mean, it takes me a while. I'm always embarrassed when I'm like giving a presentation in front of a lot of professionals, and I'm forced to go into a menu that's got like 200 things in a list, and I'm like, okay, everyone take a break for a second, because I got to read like each item in that list, because my brain just has a hard time processing long lines, right? So I need some help. I need some help. And the preview window gives us that help. All right? Check it out. This is rad. Maybe I want to have the computer automatically select the material that's responsible for shading my cube. Perhaps I don't remember the name of the material, okay? Or maybe it's just completely buried in a long list in my shader tree. Check it out. If you were to right click on any of the pixels in your preview window, the Modo preview window is going to give you some feedback. So I'm going to right click on my green cube. Bam, check it out. Okay, it gives you a little popover. Now, what you've in fact done here is you fired a little ray into your scene. Okay, the computer in a heartbeat has analyzed the location within your frame that you right clicked on, and it's fired a ray. Whatever that ray touches and intersects within our scene is giving us some feedback, and it's telling us the items within our shader tree that are physically responsible for making that thing green, okay? So on the surface, we get a nice visual list of the items that are shading that, but check it out. It's interactive, man. I love it. If I was to go in and physically select my green material, that guy right there, or even the material inside the group, check it out. Boom, the shader tree automatically selects that item for me, brings its properties out in the properties window, and I'm off to making changes. Love it! I love it! It's so awesome, okay? This is super cool, okay? This is one of a bazillion things that makes the preview window really cool. So if you get confused, if you don't remember what material is responsible for shading that particular shape in the scene, just right-click on it in the preview window. You get that little popover. I think Liam had a question, then I'll get you Roberto. Okay, Liam, what's up?
How do I make a shape have stripes like the wall?
stripes. So on my sphere over there, I selected the alternating rows, okay? So every other row I selected, and then so let me show you. So this is what I did. I selected every row like this, and then I hit the L key on my keyboard to select the remaining polygons on that loop. And then I just applied a material. That's it, a new material. A new material. All right. Roberto, you had a question?
Yeah, how did you pop up that little window again?
Just right click. Right click. Just right click on whatever. Okay? So if you want to see the material that's responsible for shading the cylinder, you right click on the cylinder, here's all the stuff that's responsible for it. Okay? Including the group and the material. And if you click on any one of those, it's automatically going to select it in the shader tree, which is awesome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. We're gonna have an entire lengthy conversation here in a minute about image maps. So we'll come back to that in detail. In detail. Other questions? Excuse me. All right. Now that we kind of have mastery of the basic application of materials to our objects within the scene, let's talk about what these materials can do, because they're a whole lot more powerful than just changing the skin color, if you will, of our objects within the scene. As 3D modelers, I implore you to start looking at your environments a little bit more critically. On one hand, we have a tough job in front of us. We have to physically create a custom shape for any number of objects in our real world. So we have to be part sculptor and part painter. We have to look at shapes in their form, right? We have to understand the totality of this form and the different planes, you know, the basic shapes that that a car is made out of, for example, okay? We have to see things in shapes, and that is tough for a lot of people, okay? Especially in 3D. All of you guys are masters at making art in 2 dimensions, right? You've been doing it since probably you're 2 or 3 years old, okay? Making shapes in 3D, however, is tough. It's new for you. That's why you're here in this class, okay? So on top of doing some very difficult things on the modeling side, we also have to be observant on how the surfaces of these objects look, okay? We have to know what the characteristics of these surfaces are so we can replicate them here in the computer.
Like if they're reflective and translucent?
Bingo, Thomas has got it. So like if they're reflective or translucent, if they're made out of concrete or are they made out of wood? Is it a really shiny material or is it a really matte material? Is it a porous material or is it a smooth material? Okay, these are the types of subtle surface details that we need to start having our brain and our eyeballs looking at. Okay, it takes a long, long time to kind of reprogram your brain to see things in surface characteristics. It's a curse, okay? I tell people that I ruin films for them. I really do. I ruin a lot of things in my classes. When you play a video game, I ruin all video games because you really start to see the machine of the video game in action when you start learning how to make video games. Same thing with 3D models. The moment you start watching, or the moment you start learning how to do 3D modeling and animation, like all things on television are now ruined for you because you can't stop looking at the 3D models. Case in point, I was watching a television commercial with my wife on 3 or 4 nights ago, and it was a really cool car commercial. And this car commercial started with this really epic like helicopter shot of like it was like a Mustang or Camaro or something, and it was just barreling through a dried up salt bed. Okay, and it was kicking out this huge plume of dust behind it, right? And it was like they do in most car commercials, they try to make it like epic and manly and stuff. And it was like doing like a power slide, on the salt bed, right? And I told my wife, I was like, that's CG. And she was like, no, it's not. That's real. That's got to be a car. I was like, nope, CG. And she's like, oh, you're just showing off. Tell me why. Tell me why it's CG. And I was like, okay, let's stop and look at it. So we have one of those DVRs, right? So I just paused the television screen. I said, let's stop and look at it for a second, okay? If this, in fact, was a real car, if this was a real Ford Mustang or Camaro, whatever it was, barreling through the desert with this huge plume of dirt kicking up behind it, the entirety of that car, especially the back of the car, would be covered in dirt. Would it not be? Yes, it would. Okay, it would. That car was spotless, and I mean spotless. There was not a flick of dirt on that car. Okay, it looked factory fresh, and and most times an advertiser always wants their cars to look perfect. Okay, huh? This is a truck commercial. Trucks are different because whenever if you have the more mud on a truck, the better. The more mud on a truck, the better. Okay. So in that moment, my wife was like, foiled again. Damn you, Pat. So I ruin things. Your eyes, you're going to start to see the world differently, and you're going to start to see images on television and print differently, and that's okay. Okay, we need to see our world differently so that we can start replicating that world in the computer. Okay, the material properties allow us to change how the lights in our scene are going to interact with our surfaces and ultimately create a very specific look. Liam, do you have a question? More than happy to answer your question if you got a question. Can I help, Liam? Okay. Liam, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just kind of put a pause on that for a moment, okay? We'll come back to that a little bit later, because I think the conversation that we're about to have is more important than making stripes on your sphere, okay? We can do that later, okay? I really want us to focus on the role of each one of the channels inside of the material properties, okay? Because they play very important roles in how the surface characteristics of our objects are going to be established. So let me just, let's start. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a step back, actually. I'm going to reassign all of the polygons on my sphere to the blue material group, just to make it a little bit easier to see what these characteristics are going to do. So I'm going to go into my scene, and I'm going to double-click on my sphere and hit the M key, and I'm going to reassign it to the blue material. I don't need to make a new blue material. I can reassign it to an existing material. That's kind of one of the cool things about this global sheeting network, is that we don't have to have a bazillion custom materials. We can have maybe 3 or 4 materials that are influencing a lot of objects in the scene. Okay? All right. So I'll just do blue. There we go. And you can see my sphere goes blue. I want to hit this little arrow in the upper right-hand corner of my preview window just to make it full screen. Okay. And shoot, let's do this. I'm going to go in. I'm going to get up all in there on my blue sphere. And we're just going to take a look-see at it. Okay. So there's my blue sphere. I have my, let me select the blue material. There we go, inside of my shader tree. And we're going to take a look at some of its properties and parameters. Earlier, we were kind of exploring the role of the diffuse color value. And as I mentioned before, the diffuse color is just kind of like the skin color of your guy. Okay, so this is kind of like the color of your car, and it's we can always change it just by clicking on that color swatch. If you look carefully, that little color swatch is broken down into 3 separate numbers. Does anyone want to take a stab at what each one of those numbers represent? You got it, RGB, you got it, RGB. Each one of those colors represents the numerical value of the red, green, and blue channel within this color. Okay? The Modo color picker is pretty great. If you don't know the RGB value, don't worry about it, just click on it. You'll get the Modo color picker. Mr. Pryor. Oh, that is a good question. I used to know what that meant. I have no idea. I've totally forgotten. That's quite okay. All right, so this is the Modo color picker. It's really neat. I wish all 3D modeling applications had a color picker like this, because what we're seeing here is really an advanced environment that allows us to zero in on colors quickly. Okay? If you're used to working with Photoshop, you take this environment for granted, okay? Because this is similar to what you see over in Photoshop. This is the only 3D modeling and animation package that I've experienced that has a color picker like this, okay? So if you go to other apps, we don't have it this good, okay? Maya looks like it's, built in the 90s, and it kind of was, okay? This is pretty futuristic. On top of being able to quickly, and I mean quickly, navigate your color wheel and choose a color for your object, So I can just left click and drag up in here. And it's live, so you can see the effects happening behind me on my sphere, which is pretty cool. So I can change the value of my color here. Down below, I can change the brightness of that color. So if I wanted like a really dark, dark, dark red, there we go. This little slider will make it really bright or really dark. Okay, so that's pretty neat. Okay. In addition to being able to very quickly adjust the hue, saturation, and value of our color, we also get to, if you examine the color mode over here, we can also change which types of colors we're seeing. Modo has a wide, broad base appeal to traditional photographers. Since we're working inside of a rendering system that's very, very similar to real-world lights and cameras, still photographers have flocked over to Modo because now they can do digital product shots quickly. Well, still photographers, they're not thinking in RGB values, they're thinking in color temperature, because each one of our studio lights has a defined temperature that determines the color. Being able to change your color picker to view the Kelvin degrees of all of those light values is pretty rad, because now we have an environment that changes a little bit more quickly, and something that our product shot guys and our traditional photographers are going to be very used to working with. Okay, because all lights are basically shades of blue and yellow, so this allows us to quickly navigate to that specific color value. In addition, we can also do kind of a more traditional RGB color wheel. So again, if you're used to working inside of Photoshop and using the RGB color space opposed to the hue, saturation, value color space that we were working with before, that's of an advantage as well. Now let me show you this, another really cool thing, and this is really kind of me showing off about the Modo color picker. Check this out. If you were to go over to the options, see how we have two vertical tabs over here? We have color and we have options. Okay, I love this because our options gives us some really cool things here. So down here in the rules, right now we're seeing just a single color. However, if we change the rule to show all the complementary colors, check it out. Now we're seeing all the complementary colors to that shade of orange, and we can see the shade of blue that perfectly complements that shade of orange. Okay, this is unheard of in a 3D modeling application. I mean, this is just amazing. This is another fantastic reason why Modo really is the first next generation 3D modeling and animation package. Okay, you can't do this in anything else. Okay, it's taking the traditional color wheel parameters that we're used to seeing in like Photoshop and Illustrator, and it's bringing it into a 3D modeling application. That's awesome. Love it. Love it. So we can change the rules. Maybe you want all the compound colors. I mean, look, and it all like updates live. This is fun. I mean, this. Okay, I need to calm down for a moment because I am like geeking out up here. So you go into options. Options inside the color picker, and what I'm changing under the HSV options are the rules. Okay, are the rules. So if you just leave it as solo, you'll get just the single wheel. However, you can change the rules. I bring this up because some of my other classes we change the rules quite frequently when we're designing other parts of our animations and our design work. So if you walk into the lab and it's like it's got all these different shades popping up in your color wheel, just remember, go to the options tab. Rules, change it back to solo, back to the way it was. All right? Okay. So that's the Modo color picker. It's great. I think I'm just going to leave it as blue for the time being. All right. So right now, if you look carefully at my sphere, it's a pretty basic looking sphere. What type of material, what type of characteristic surface characteristics would you say that my little sphere looks like right now? Is there a material out there in the real world that this thing looks like? Yeah, it's kind of plastically. It's definitely smooth, right? What tells you that it's smooth? Rubber. It's rubbery, absolutely. What tells you that it's smooth and rubbery? The reflection. The reflection, absolutely. The diffuse color value is just going to change the color. But what ultimately starts to determine the surface characteristics is the specular highlight. Okay? Specular highlight is that little white dot that you see at the top of my little sphere. So specifically, what I'm looking at is that. What I'm looking at is that guy right there. Okay, this is the specular highlight in all of its glory. The specular highlight reminds our eye and our subconscious as to the surface characteristics of this shape. And really, it's a trick, okay? It's a camera trick. This is just nothing more than some fancy computer code giving us an inaccurate, false reflection of the light source in the scene. That's all a specular highlight's doing. It's just a reflection of the light source in the scene, okay? We have a directional light in our scene, a singular directional light, right? So we're kind of getting a little highlight, a reflection of that light source across the surface, okay? Specular highlights are important. They remind us of the surface characteristics of that object, okay? But we get to control it. Because it's a trick, because it's nothing more than some fancy computer code, we get to control it, okay? The specular highlight is something that goes all the way back to the early days of computer graphics. Way back in the late 70s and the early 80s, the big thinking programmers that developed this entire standard knew that we had to generate a specular highlight, but they didn't have the computational power and the programming sophistication, if you will, to generate an accurate, true reflection of the specular highlight. So they faked it. It's not a real reflection. It's just a fake, okay? Since it's a fake, we get to control it, okay? We often want to control it. The next kind of group of channels below the diffuse values is called the specular amount, Fresnel, and specular color. These three channels inside of our property are going to influence how the specular highlight's drawn, okay? Now, whenever you see amount, in your mind, start thinking intensity. So if I was to increase the specular amount, what do you think would happen to that little white dot on top of my sphere? It's get brighter. It get brighter. It's not going to grow bigger, not too much, but fundamentally it's going to get brighter. Let's check it out. The default value is 20%, and you get a kind of a cool result. Let me zoom out for a second here. And I'm just going to toggle this. I'm going to put my specular amount to 100%. Watch what happens. Boom. What happened to my specular highlight? Significantly brighter, right? The interior core of that specular highlight has gone pure white, and the feathered edges are, they're pretty small, okay? The core of it went super, super bright. With a really strong reflection of our light source in our scene, we're starting to simulate something that's a little bit more metallic, right? This is called a quick fall off. More on this here in a minute, okay? Bright specular highlights look more metallic, okay? Then really dim specular highlights, okay? In addition, we can also change the specular color. If you want to tint your specular highlight to a very specific color, you can do that. I often don't do this, and here's why, because you get really funky results. I don't know why you'd want to have a, kind of pinkish purple specular highlight, but you can, okay? So you can tint it. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. We're going to come back to the Fresnel value a little bit later. So specular amount, the intensity of our specular highlight, and of course the color is just the color of it. Now the roughness channel, the one right below specular color, is really important because the roughness value is ultimately going to determine the size of our specular highlight. I mentioned before that with metallic textures, we're going to have a very quick fall off. So they're going to be smooth, right? Okay. Metallic textures are historically very smooth in comparison to like concrete that's very porous. A lot of pits and grooves in concrete, right? Or like a chalk, for example, very porous, a lot of grooves in there, okay? So the roughness value is going to help us determine the overall size of our specular highlight. Let me show you what it looks like in action. Right now the default value is 40%. If I was to increase it to, like 100%, check it out, watch what happens. Boom, it gets much, much brighter, or much, much bigger. I'm going to lower my specular amount back down to a value of 20 so we don't get that clipping. Here we go. Let's look at it from over here. A little bit easier to see. Okay? So the roughness value is going to determine the size. As we lower that value, it gets much, much smaller. Okay? Traditionally, with metallic textures, because of the surface characteristics of metal, the light is not gonna reflect back into the scene almost instantly, right? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Let's workshop this. Let's imagine it's an art class, so we can pretend. Okay, we are standing in front of Fort Knox. Is anyone else as curious as I am what's happening in Fort Knox? I like desperately want to go into Fort Knox. Like, what is in there? Well, we know it's our gold reserve, but what else is in there, right? There's these wacky conspiracy theories that there's all sorts of other cool stuff, you know, secured and hidden in the vaults of Fort Knox. I desperately want to know what's going on in there, okay? Yeah, exactly. Some people say there's like aliens, like dead aliens in Fort Knox. You know, I want to know, man. I want to know what's in there, okay? So you're in Fort Knox. You just like, bam, you kick down the door to Fort Knox. You're standing in front of a gigantic room of gold bars, and you pick up a gold bar in your hands, right? And then you take that gold bar, and you almost drop on your foot because it weighs like 50 pounds, okay? So knowing that it weighs 50 pounds, you really hold on to it tight, okay? And then you start going, you know, you start doing have like a, you know, a Schmeagol moment from Lord of the Rings. You start petting it, my precious, precious gold bar, okay? As you rub your hand along the gold bar, how does it feel? Smooth, right? Smooth. There's not a lot of pores in it. There's not a lot of bumps and grooves and scratches and gouges along the surface of that metallic object, right? So how is the light going to interact with it? It's just going to bounce off of it quickly, right? Because there's no pits and grooves for those little light rays to scatter around in and to kind of hang out, it's just going to reflect almost immediately back into our scene. Those surfaces have what's called a quick fall off, where the light ray just goes boink off the surface, okay? It doesn't hang out on the surface. It doesn't hang out and have like, you know, a cup of coffee, okay? It just reflects and it goes somewhere else in the scene. So in order for us to get that illusion, to achieve that surface characteristic, we have to have a really intense specular amount and a really small, put us back up to like 100, really intense specular amount, and then a really small roughness value. Look what happens. It gets much smaller, and the edges become a little bit more crisp and clean, right? Now we're starting to get into that world where it's beginning, and I mean beginning, to look metallic. We still have some other things that we have to do to really get us there, but the specular highlight is the first thing that our brains need to start looking at, okay? Looking around our environment right now, you can see that every single object in this scene has a specular highlight in one size and in one color, okay? It's something we can't stop from happening. The specular highlight is a reflection of the light source, and it's the first visual indicator as to the surface characteristics of that object. If we keep cruising down that list, okay, so here's the roughness. Roughness is a big one. Size of our specular highlight. Anastrophe, you know, just forget that's there. Okay. Making anastrophic materials is crazy advanced. I don't even think I understand it, to be honest with you. And the best way for me to describe what an anastrophic material is have you guys ever seen those pieces, those like metallic artwork that people use like with grinders and stuff? And you look at the metal from one angle, and it just looks like a whole bunch of squiggly lines. And then you look at it from another, and there's like a rainbow pattern on those squiggly lines. That's an anastrophic material, okay? Yeah, it's anastrophic materials are usually reserved for like for metals, okay? And they're really neat. They look really cool, but they require some pretty advanced setups to get us to that end result. So just ignore it. Just ignore it. We're never going to be using that channel here in this class. However, the reflection amount is something that we're going to be using quite frequently. Every single surface, and I mean every single surface, has a certain degree of reflectivity. Okay? Everything is reflective, of course, to varying degrees. Even the skin on your body is reflective. Okay? As I'm looking around this room, I can see the reflection of the light rays coming from your computers on your faces. Your face is reflective. Just not nearly as reflective as, say, like a mirror or a goblet or something. Okay? Or of metal. Everything is reflective. Shoot, even wood is reflective. Okay? The reflection amount allows us to very quickly change the intensity of the reflections on that surface. The default value is 0. Let me zoom out a little bit here and let's take a look at our blue sphere. And let's start dialing up this reflection amount. So if I was to take this to like 100%, what would you imagine is going to happen to my sphere? Yeah, it's going to turn into like kind of like a chrome ball, okay? Let's go to 100%. Boom. Okay, pretty cool, huh? Chrome ball. And if you look carefully, you can actually start to see the reflection of the other objects within the scene. I can see, if you look carefully here, I can start to see, yep, there's my donut, okay? I can see, if you go around this side, here we go. I can see my cylinder, there's my donut, there's my cube, here's my little cone. I mean, it is a true reflective object now, okay? And it's reflecting everything that's in our scene. It's pretty neat. Yeah, chrome, instantly, okay? However, even at a value of 100%, we're still getting a little bit of that blue in there, right? Can you still see some of that blue? Yeah, check out the horizon line along the chrome sphere, okay? And look at the edges. That blue right in here is still being generated from the diffuse color value. So I tell people, whenever you work with reflective materials, turn the diffuse value off, okay? So the diffuse amount, just put it down to like 0. And now we're starting to make something that truly looks like chrome, okay? Let me put this back to 80% because I want to dial down my reflective amount just to kind of show you what this looks like at smaller values. Very rarely are we going to be having a reflection amount that's at 100%. You're only going to do this if you're doing like chrome or a mirror, and very few things in our world are 100% reflective. So we need there are some variations in there. I find that small changes to your reflection amount have massive effects across how that object's going to look within your scene. Check it out. Let's put this to a value of 1% and see what happens. Look carefully. Can you start to see the reflection on the scene? Yeah, absolutely. It's still there. I can still see the border of the ground plane that my objects are sitting along. If you look carefully right here, you can see my little cone. There's my cube. We're still getting the true reflections, just at a much smaller quality level. Okay? Small movements in the reflection amount are going to have big impacts on your scene. Historically, on most objects, you're between 1 and 5%, to be honest with you, okay? I very rarely start driving up into that 10, 20%. Usually when you get in the 10, 20%, that's a really reflective object, okay? And very few things are that reflective in our world. As an illustration of that, let's just put it up to 20%, and you can see that those reflections are becoming a more dominant feature across the surface of my sphere, okay? All right. Now, let's do this. Let's put this up to a value of 50%. So I want to talk about where we're seeing the reflections across the surface of my sphere. Now, look critically. Everyone just stop for a second and look at my sphere. Where along the surface of my sphere are we seeing the reflections? Give me a location. Thomas. The left area, where else are we seeing the reflections? Yeah, all the way across. You're absolutely right. We're seeing the reflections kind of on the interior of the sphere. If you look critically at our sphere here, check it out. We're seeing reflections all up in here, okay? However, look carefully at the edges. Is it super reflective along the very, very outside edge? Yeah, it's kind of blue, right? Which is the diffuse color value, the diffuse color of our sphere, right? So whenever we increase the reflection amount, really what we're doing is that we're increasing the reflectivity on the interior of the sphere, okay? Now there's an important distinction that we need to make here because we can change this, okay? We can change this. Oftentimes, we don't want to have reflections along the interior. We want to have reflections along the exterior of our sphere. Thus enter the role of the Fresnel effect. If you look right down in our reflection options here, you can see that we have reflection amount, and immediately below it, we have the Fresnel amount, okay? The Fresnel effect is a naturally occurring phenomenon. It happens everywhere. It's happening in this very room right now, okay? It's a physically based lighting characteristic that we can't turn off. So here's a great example. My old boss, I think, had the perfect example of this, and so I'm going to plagiarize from his kind of repertoire, okay? When I was first learning computer graphics, he gave me, I think, the best illustration of what the Fresnel effect is actually doing. Okay, imagine you're like me. I order a lot of things on Amazon. I do. I shouldn't spend as much money on Amazon, but it's free shipping, so why not? Okay, because why go down to Walmart and deal with the crazy crowds when I can buy it on Amazon and they just give it to me for free, or they ship it to me for free? Amazon Prime, man, it's worth it. Anyways, I buy a lot of things on Amazon. And the great thing about Amazon is that they use FedEx at times, right? And I love FedEx because getting a package in the mail is like Christmas. It really is great, okay? And they make it even worse because now they give you like little tracking numbers. Those tracking numbers are awesome, but they're horrible at the same time, right? Because then you know exactly where your package is. And I always love looking at those tracking numbers because like, oh, it's in New Jersey, all right. Then like the next day you're like, oh, it's in Omaha, it's on its way, you know, woo, you get excited. And then like the next day you're like, it's in Oakland, you know. And then the day that's the worst is like when it's actually in Sacramento, when it says on the truck. Oh, I love and hate that day because you're like, any minute, it's going to show up at the door, and especially if it's something you're really, really waiting for, okay? And it's like, any minute, it's on the truck, okay? And then as soon as you know, you hear the FedEx truck coming down the street, you get excited, you go to your front door, and if you're like me, you wait impatiently at your front door for the FedEx guy, right? Or gal. Yeah.
Sometimes they're sneaky though. Just leave there.
Sometimes, I know, right? I hate that. When they don't even ring the doorbell, they just drop it off and take off. That drives me crazy because I want my stuff, you know?
You were home, you were waiting all day.
Yeah, right. So I'm standing there on the front door on my front porch looking out at the FedEx truck. And the FedEx truck is right smack in front of me, and the little dude in his shorts are coming out with my package up in the driveway, okay? So I'm looking at the FedEx truck, and on the side of the FedEx truck is the logo, the FedEx logo, right? Now, when I'm looking dead on at that FedEx truck, I can see the logo in all of its glory, right? Can instantly see it without a problem. Now, I get my package from the FedEx guy. He wanders back down into his truck, turns it on, takes off for the next customer, right? And I'm waving at the FedEx guy because I'm always polite. I always say thank you because it's kind of like, it's awesome. It's good to be polite. And as the FedEx truck leaves, I'm noticing that the side of the truck where I used to see the logo perfectly, as it travels away and as the angle of that surface changes from the angle of my eyes, that FedEx logo is now turning into a mirror. Have you guys seen that? Yeah. You see it all the time in glass, right? Where you're looking through the car window, you can see it through the car window. But the moment you change your angle on that car window, it turns into a reflective surface and you can't see in. That is the Fresnel effect, okay? You can't turn it off. It's always on. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon, okay? Well, we get to control the Fresnel effect. Right now, we've turned it off. Let's turn it on and take a look at what it's going to do. I think that the Fresnel effect is most easily seen on planar surfaces. So I'm actually going to jump over into the material that's responsible for drawing my cube and turn up the Fresnel value. You'll see it in action here. Okay, check it out. All right, let me zoom out a moment here. So there is my green cube. I want to right-click on it. Grab the material that's responsible for shading those pixels, and let's just turn on the Fresnel effect. I'm just going to turn it on to 100% just to illustrate what's going on. Okay. Ta-da! Is the entirety of my cube reflective? No. Which plane is not reflective? The one that's facing me. Not reflective at all. The one that's facing the opposite direction of the plane of the camera has turned into a kind of like a mirror. Very small. It's not at 100%. If I start to change my angle, watch what happens when I start to rotate my camera. This is reflective, and then now it's just barely reflective, and as I get over here, now this side is reflective, okay? That's the Fresnel effect, okay? As that surface enters in what's called to the glancing angle, or it's going to turn non-reflective. As that surface rotates into what's called the incident angle, it becomes reflective in a percentage of reflectivity depending on the angle to the plane of the camera. Okay? Almost all objects in our world have the Fresnel effect applied to them in very small degrees, okay? Reflective objects like chrome and mirror and glass, they're going to have a very high Fresnel effect. When you look at something like wood or skin or, like a chalky pattern, they're going to have very low Fresnel values, but they're always there. They're always there. On spherical objects, let's go back to our sphere here. Check this action out. Let's go back to our sphere. I'm going to go back into my blue material. I'm going to, just to illustrate what's going on here, I'm going to turn off the reflection amount. Okay, now we're back to this blue sphere. And I'm going to overdrive the Fresnel value and put up to 100%. And you can see what happens on spherical objects. Just the edges are reflective. Okay? Now we're starting to get a much different look on our sphere. Okay? When we pair the Fresnel effect with the reflection amount, we create something that's a little bit more compelling to look at. Okay? We create something that truly does represent an accurate representation of our scene. Okay? And here is I've dialed up the reflection amount to 10%. So it's incredibly shiny around the edges and then just like 10% reflective in the center. We control now where it's the most reflective. Okay? This is a very, very powerful addition to the Modo shading engine. Okay? It's awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Love it, love it, love it. All right. Moving on, let's check out a couple more. All right. Okay. There is two parameters right below the reflection amount and the Fresnel amount that I want to focus on. Right now, the reflection type is the full scene, so it's reflecting everything. It's reflecting all the true three-dimensional objects within our scene. So the cylinder, the cube, the cone, all those other shapes are casting a true or getting a reflection across the surface of my sphere. I can change that, however. Maybe I don't want my sphere to reflect all the other objects. Okay? Maybe I don't want to see the reflection of my cone in my sphere, right? Well, changing my reflection type from full scene to environment only is going to give me this result. Okay? And ultimately what we gain here is the ability to just reflect the environment. We get to control it a whole lot more. Okay? I like control. Big fan of control. Yeah?
So if it reflects the environment, it looks more metallic while the full scene looks more glass.
Yeah, I think that's a step in the right direction. I want to turn my reflection type back to full scene, and I want to talk for a second about the next one. Now, this next one is going to determine how the reflections are created in the scene. And here's my little object, okay? I'm going to render my scene as is, just so we have a point of comparison here. So let's just fire off a render, hit the render button. Yoink, here comes their Modo rendering engine. There it goes, and it took, if you look over in your statistics panel here, you can see that the elapsed time, 6.2 seconds. Not bad. It's pretty quick. It's pretty quick for a great looking render with global illumination and all that other jazz. Okay. So 6.2 seconds. Commit that to memory. Remember that number. Okay. In addition to being able to change what is reflected in our scene with that environment type, okay, we also get to change how it's reflective. Now, if you look around at the back of all these iMac computers in here, okay, what basic material are these iMacs, or the back of the iMacs, made from? Yeah, it's kind of brushed aluminum, right? It's an aluminum. And if you look carefully at the backs of the computer that's in front of you, how do the reflections look? Do they look really crisp and clear? No. No, they look kind of blurry and diffused out a little bit, okay? Feathered, if you will. Well, we can do the exact same thing here in Modo by enabling blurry reflections, okay? Blurry reflections, that guy right there, okay? I want to turn it on. Let me zoom out so you guys can see the effect. I want to turn it on. Let's take a look at it. All right. Now look at our scene. Now we're not getting those crisp edges that we had before, and everything looks a little bit blurry. We can enhance the blur through some other features. We're not going to talk about that today. But you can go in and adjust how blurry that reflection is showing up on your scene. I bring this up because it allows us to achieve a really cool result, but it comes at a price. Okay? Blurry reflections are one of those shading parameters that it's going to your render times are going to take a hit. Check it out. Let's render it now. Render it again. The last one was 6.2 seconds, right? Let's see what we got now. Yeah, much longer. If you look at the elapsed time on this render, boom, right there, 9.5. Okay, so about a 33% increase in render times. Now, when you're working with higher resolution objects, so if you're doing like, if you're rendering things for a feature film or even for 1080p HD, you're going to increase the size of the image that you're going to render, so you also need to increase the quality of your render. If you look carefully across the surface of the mesh, it kind of looks, or across the surface of the render, kind of looks a little grainy. You know, it doesn't look really crisp and clean. That's because the blurry reflections parameter is being influenced by these rays. The reflection rays, this channel right here, the default value is 64. If we were to increase these rays to like 512, I'm going to go way farther than I need to, we now have more information that the rendering engine is collecting, okay? Because I always think of these rays like, imagine a ray kind of like an arrow being shot out into the scene, okay? At the end of that arrow is a little sensor, and that sensor sends information back to the rendering engine. So the more arrows you have firing out into your scene, the more data and information on the surface characteristics the rendering engine has at its disposal to calculate the image that we see in front of you. That increase in accuracy comes at a cost. Let's render that exact same image yet again. Let's see how long it takes to render. Yeah, significantly longer. Significantly longer. That the results you get in the Modo rendering engine is quite good. But now, check it out. It took 19.7 seconds to render this frame. Okay. In comparison, the other one, 9.5 seconds, and then 6.2 without blurry reflections enabled. Okay. So, kind of a hit. It's worth it. It's worth it. Okay. The results that you're going to get are amazing. They're butter smooth when we increase those rays, but just prepare for longer render times.
So this is like two different blurry reflections right there. A check mark and the button as well. The circle that's next to that check mark.
Don't hit the circle. If you hit the circle, it's going to go red. Hit that circle again until it goes green or it goes not red. If you hit that circle, you're actually adding a keyframe to that value. So you're kind of animating that value. You don't want to do that. Okay? Yeah. Anytime you see a little circle, that's something that can be animated inside of Modo. And if you look at it, if you look at critically at all the channels, almost everything is animatable, which is awesome. Okay, let's keep cruising. So blurry reflections, I use blurry reflections. I just wanted to show you what they look like and some of the pitfalls of enabling them in your scene. It's just going to result in longer render times, but at times it's worth it because it looks awesome. Okay. Now, if we keep cruising down this list, we have clear coat amount. This is a new parameter that popped up in the last couple versions. It's pretty neat. The clear coat amount is going to simulate. Let me just turn off my reflections here. The clear coat amount is going to simulate kind of like a lacquered finish. Okay, it's an additional reflection parameter that's on top of your reflection amount. So if I put this like to 100%, yeah, it behaves similarly to that of the reflection amount. Yet it's doing some really cool things with refraction and light on the surface. It really is simulating a lacquered finish. Okay. It's cool. I find myself whenever I'm doing shiny objects, I just turn on clear coat amount just by habit now. It's just awesome. It makes my stuff look pretty amazing quickly. Okay. Now we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about bump amplitude and bump distance, but I do want to show you kind of the result of enabling these features. We're going to talk a lot about creating bump maps, creating displacement maps later on, okay? It's a little too much for today's conversation because I know I'm running out of time here. However, I do want to just very quickly show you the effect that's achieved. Often, we want to create the illusion of actual little pits and grooves across the surface of our character, or surface of our mesh, right? What if we're modeling concrete? Or if we're modeling little hills and valleys across the surface of our sphere, okay? Well, we don't necessarily have to use geometry to create those effects for us. We can use bump maps and displacement maps to generate that information for us, okay? Now, I'm going to do something really quickly that's I'm not going to explain, so just bear with me. I just want to demonstrate and illustrate what these effects do, okay? I'm going to very quickly go in and apply a bump map to my sphere. So let's just do, I'm going to do add layer, and let's just do, let's do organic, and then we'll do concrete. All right, so there's my new map, okay? And let's do this. I'm going to, let's not make it, yep, sorry, excuse me. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Oops, how about we go back to solid just for the time being. Go, let's make it much smaller. Let's make it 1 centimeter. There we go. And now you can see a whole bunch of small little speckles cruising out across the surface of my mesh, right? Well, I'm going to change this black and white image into a bump map. In effect, I'm going to use all these grayscale values to determine the height and the relief of the surface of my mesh. So let me just do it basic surface shading, bump. And now, if you look very carefully across my sphere, it looks like it has some texture on it. It looks like it has a whole bunch of little bumps and grooves cruising around my mesh. That's called a bump map, okay? So material properties that we were talking about before, the material channel bump amplitude, so this one right here is going to affect the height of that bump effect. Right now, each one of my little peaks is 5 millimeters in size. Let's make it a centimeter. And you can see that now we're getting a much larger effect across the surface of my geometry. Okay? So that's what the bump amplitude and the displacement amount are going to do. They're going to work in conjunction with some image maps to create physical relief across the surface of our geometry. It can. In situations, it can increase our render times. Let's kind of test it real fast. Let's do a render with it on and without it on so we have a point of comparison. Now let me make sure that blurry reflections are off, and they are. There we go. So let's render it real fast. Let's see what we get. The Modo rendering engine is so fast to begin with, you can do tests like this pretty quickly and kind of zero in on the settings to get a better result. So there's with it on, and it took about, what, 14 seconds. Let's turn that effect off just by disabling the procedural texture. Re-render the scene, see what we get. It's probably going to be right around 7 or 8 seconds. Or 5.7. So yes, it does add to the render time a little bit. Okay. The bump maps and the displacement effects are really cool because they illustrate what we can do with the images. We don't necessarily have to model everything. We can use bump and displacement effects to get some really cool effects. Okay. More on that much later. I just wanted to kind of introduce and illustrate the concept today. We're going to be talking a lot about bump maps and displacement maps as we go through this process. Okay. Starting this week, every single week, we're going to talk a little bit more about rendering. Every week, we're going to be rendering stuff and exploring new facets of the Modo rendering engine. Okay. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about materials, about reflective materials, and specifically metals to help us achieve our little stoplight. You're going to love it. The week after that, we're going to talk a lot about glass and transparent materials. Okay. So every week, we're going to continue exploring new areas of the Modo rendering engine. Okay. Any questions so far?
Can you do that one more time? Bump?
The bump map? Which part would you like me to do again?
I was just trying to do it.
Yeah, sure. I can show you where in the interface I went. I wasn't necessarily looking to explain the process of creating one, but ultimately what I did was inside my material group, I created an image map called a procedural image. And a procedural image is nothing more than an image that the computer draws for us. Okay? So if you go up to Add Layer, Enhance Modo Textures, I went into the Organic category, And I don't know which one I used. I think I used concrete. Yeah. There's some really cool ones in here. And let's do another one. Let's do blister. I don't know. There we go. Don't be seduced by the titles of these procedurals. The titles are a little misleading. Actually, they're a lot misleading. Let's see what happens if I make this image smaller. Yeah, now we can see a little bit more of the blister pattern showing up across the surface. Yeah, now we got a whole bunch of specks. Let's make it bigger. Now it's kind of looking a little scaly, which is neat. Once you have the procedural image applied, under the Effect column inside of your shader tree, you can right-click on the word Diffuse Color and change its role inside of the shading engine. And I went to Surface Shading, bump. Now we kind of have a scaly surface. Pretty neat. Yeah, and you can actually mix and match them. That's kind of the cool thing about working inside the shader tree, is that I can blend them, much like we can blend layers over in Photoshop. So if I turn both of them on, let's see, we're not getting any effect now. It's just purely the scaly, bumpy things. But however, if I click on my blister and go over to my Texture Layers tab here, blend mode, let's change it to, I know that when we screen something, all of the black pixels on that image map are made transparent. So let's do that. Let's screen it. And now we're getting a mixture of the both. That fine, bumpy material and the scaly things all in action at the same time. The Modo shader tree is, in essence, very, very similar to Photoshop. And it's awesome. I love it. I really do. It's great. Other questions? Let's take a break. Let's take a break. And, check this out. I made something for you guys to help you out. And for our folks in the live stream. Break time. Let's take a break. 10 minutes. I think I want to make like an alarm sound effect. Like when it starts getting down to like 0. Like it like flashes like 10, 9, 8. I'm joking. Okay, break time is over. Let's hit it. Okay, so I'm going to open up a project file. I'm going to open up my corkboard real fast, and we're going to begin to explore how to work with image maps or photographs, because we want all of our... Go. Hold on a sec. Make sure I'm in. There we go. Okay, so here's my corkboard. Okay, I want to go in and start placing some photographs on my individual posters. Okay, so now we got to transition from working with materials to including image maps or texture files or photographs into the Modo shading engine, and this is the result that I'm trying to get after here. Okay, so I want to initially work with this photograph down over in the lower left-hand corner of my corkboard. So let's just check it out real fast, and I'm going to right-click on it and open up the photo material, and just temporarily I'm going to delete that image. Okay, so there we go. Here's it kind of raw, untouched. Very similar to what you guys have on your own corkboards. Okay, one of your challenges this week is to put content on the posters that you created last week. So this is our conversation is going to directly address this issue. Okay. Adding texture maps or image maps, depending on who you talk to, is really easy inside of Modo. And I want to show you a fantastic little production trick that will help. They'll make it even easier to ensure that the image map that you want to put on that poster actually gets applied to that poster correctly and the first time. Okay? Remember, whenever we create a material group, it's almost like creating a small little folder. So the contents of that folder are only going to influence the polygons that were tagged to that group. Okay? Now I've tagged this polygon right here to my photo material group, so it's the only one that I'm going to change. Okay? Adding an image map is really, really easy, and here's how you do it. Or here's how I would suggest and like to encourage you guys to do it going forward. Have your material group already selected. If the group is selected, not the material, the folder, if you will. If the folder is selected, so this guy right here, if it's selected when you add the image map is automatically going to go into that folder, which is what we want it to happen. Okay? So let's do it real fast. Adding an image map is really easy. With the group selected, with the group selected, we go to the top of the shader tree where it says Add Layer. From that pull-down list, we can add a whole bunch of different types of layers into our shader tree, one of which gives us an option called Image Map. And we get 4 or 5 different options inside of the Image Map function. Okay? The one that we want to choose is Load Image. Please, please, please do not underscore this. Star next to it. Circle it in your brain. Do not choose New Image. Okay? A new image is going to create a blank texture that we then can paint on. More on that in the upcoming weeks. Okay? We want to load an existing file. Okay? So load image. Load image. Once we hit the load image button, boom, our standard OS dialog box is going to pop open, and it's going to ask us to navigate to where that file has been stored, and I'm just going to go into my week 4 stuff here. And there it is, fallleaves.jpg. Hit it. Ta-da! Yes, sir.
I have a photo of my flower.
Perfect. Use that. If that's what you want on your poster, go ahead and load it into that material group. Okay? Now look at my photograph. Mission accomplished to a certain degree, right? Kinda. What's wrong with my photograph? Sideways. It's absolutely sideways. Okay? Whenever we create an image, or excuse me, whenever we load an image into Modo, a couple things have been created automatically for us in the background. Let's look at our shader tree and examine the component parts that have changed inside of our shader tree. You can see that in the material group called photo, we have a new icon. Okay, This little sphere with the Mona Lisa wrapped around the sphere. I mentioned earlier that whenever you see a Mona Lisa, you should think image. So here that icon is again. It's returned, okay? And this is the icon for an image map. Good timing, just started. This is the icon for an image map, so get used to seeing it, okay? With the image map selected, its properties, of course, will become available to us over in the Properties tab. Zoom out for a moment and look at its properties, okay? As with all of the Modo elements, we're going to get a whole series of vertical tabs in the right-hand section of the Properties tab, okay? And right now, I'm in the Texture Layers property. And this is going to determine how the image is drawn, okay? Including the blend mode, the opacity. We can invert the image if we wanted to. We can change the high and the low values, the gamma. We have a lot of control as to how this image is drawn inside of Modo. Most of these things, I'd probably say like 95% of these things, you're not going to touch this semester inside of the shader tree, okay? However, if we look up one vertical tab, you will notice probably the most important tab inside of your image map, okay? And it's the texture locator. The texture locator is automatically created the moment you import a texture map into Modo. It's an item. It's actually something that you can see and manipulate inside of your OpenGL viewport. More on that in a second, okay? So it really is a thing. It's not just a property or a parameter. The texture locator plays a really crucial, important role inside the Modo rendering engine. Does anyone know what a texture locator does? This is something that's not specific to working inside of Modo. If you go over to Maya, you're going to be working with texture locators. Cinema 4D has texture locators. Does anyone know what they do? Yeah, that's the, everyone always says, they locate the texture. Well, not really, okay? Huh? Yeah, I like it. They show where the texture is located within the scene. So in my mind, they're kind of responsible for placing the image on the polygon, okay? They determine where this texture is blasted inside of our scene. Okay, so here's what I want you to do real quick. Liam, did you have a question? Okay, but I need you to be with me, okay? Because this is an important concept that I want everyone to be with me on, okay? This is a critical one, okay? When we import a texture, it's the computer needs to understand where to put this texture on my polygon. It's not just automatically going to show up on it. There's a set of rules that determine where it's going to show up and how it's going to show up on the texture, okay? Now here's a great metaphor that I think a lot of you guys can grasp and understand. Imagine you're going to the movies, right? The texture locator is kind of like the cinema projector that's in the back of the movie theater, right? Because if you think about it, the cinema projector, its whole job is to take a little image, right, and to blast it onto the screen, right? You with me? You shine a light through the image, that image now goes onto the screen, right? The texture locator is very similar to that. It's projecting an image onto a very, very specific location within our scene and a very specific polygon. That polygon is determined by the texture or by the material group. Okay? If you look carefully, the rules that determine how this texture is projected on top of our polygons are encapsulated right here under projection type. These are the rules, okay? We want to change the rules because the default rules do not apply for us, and they're not going to apply for us for a number of weeks, okay? The default rule that determines how this image shows up on our image is called a UV map. Now, when you get to GCOM 424, you guys are going to become ninjas at making UV maps because I know a lot of you guys want to work in the game industry, so the UV map projection type is a required element for that pipeline, okay? We're going to talk about UV maps a little bit in here. When we start working on our cell phone here in a couple weeks, we're going to create some image maps. We're going to create a cool little martini glass. We're going to put a little umbrella on it. It's going to have a UV map on that too. Okay? We'll talk about that in the upcoming weeks. But for today, next week, and even the week after, we need to change this. Okay? We need to change the rule that determines how that image is blasted onto that polygon. If we click on that list, you can see that there are a number of rules that are available to us. Basically ignore everything from front projection down. So ignore all this stuff in here. Not important, not important. However, we do want to work with solid, planar, cylindrical, spherical, and cubic, okay? These are rules, okay? These rules determine how the texture is wrapped around our polygons.
If you're uploading a photo onto your corkboard and it doesn't, and it fills in the color, it's sideways, what do you do to get?
Great question. We need to change the rules. We need to change the rules that will ultimately determine how this texture is going to be blasted onto our surface, okay? Now, often you go, well, which rule do we use? Which projection type do we use?
We use the thing that's similar to our object.
Yeah, user's got it. We need to look at what we're projecting onto and choose one of these rules that's most similar to that shape. Now, I'm trying to blast a photograph of a house and some trees onto a poster. Well, what basic, simple shape is a poster? Cubic or a plane, right? Cubic would represent a six-sided, a cube, okay? Something with 6 sides on it. Well, I have a two-dimensional plane, so I'm going to choose planar, okay? That's the rule that I want Modo to use to place my texture, my image, on my polygon. If you're working with a sphere, you'd use the spherical rule, or the cylindrical rule if you're working with the cylinder, okay? So we have to look at the shape that we're trying to put the image on and match the rule to that shape. For your posters this week, and even parts of your corkboard, I would like you guys to use the planar projection type, okay? Planar being a plane, a two-dimensional square, okay? When we choose the planar projection type, let's check out the results. Yeah, okay. So we're getting better. We're getting better, but we're not perfect. Yeah.
How do I get of course I have my photo the same way as you.
Uh-huh.
How am I supposed to get my color back? Because the photo is literally
Covering up the color. So that's kind of the trick, okay? You can't mix and match the background color of the polygon with the texture, okay? The texture is kind of like wrapping paper on your birthday present, okay? We're taking an image and we're physically wrapping it around that shape. Yours has disappeared, and others people's may disappear. So if you get an inconsistent result, let's fix it, okay? Because the first thing that we got to do is that we got to change the projection type, but we're not done yet. Because you can see on my screen here, we're 30% done, okay? We have a long, long ways to go. Because I don't want, I got 8 pictures here. I only want 1, okay? What we're doing, or what the computer is doing here, is that it's repeating this picture infinitely, horizontally, and vertically across the axis of this plane. Okay? This is called tiling. This is called tiling, where it just automatically repeats it over and over and over and over again. And yeah. If you used to playing a lot of old school video games from the 90s, you saw tiling textures all over the video games, right? Because they had one texture of a little cube of grass, and it was stamped down a bazillion times. That's the tiling texture. This is what the computer's doing, that exact same thing. We want to turn this off, right? Because we only want to see this photograph uno times, okay? So let's turn it off. Let's turn it off. The way we can turn it off is by going into our texture locator yet again. And if we keep cruising down below the projection type, check it out. We have the horizontal repeat and the vertical repeat. These 2 channels are going to determine how it's being stamped and repeated across our scene. So if we turn them to reset on both of them, check it out. Mine's going to be gone, but it's no longer there. Okay? I'll talk about why it's not there in a second. Mr. Gallagher, you had a question. Okay. So it appears as though we've taken a gigantic step back, but we haven't. Okay? Remember, the texture locator is responsible for determining where within our scene our texture is being blasted onto. If I was to close my window here or minimize my preview window and open up my perspective viewport, we'll get a really good indication as to where that texture is, okay? All right, so here's my scene. We're trying to place my photograph on this guy right here, okay? Check it out. If we navigate around the scene, we're going to start to see something new pop up. See the little white cube? That's my texture, okay? Is it anywhere close to my photograph? No, so it's not going to show up on my photograph, okay? We need to have the computer automatically place that little white cube on top of my texture or my polygon for me, okay? Because it's kind of in the opposite location. It's way off over here, okay? I need it to be down over here. There are some ways that we can do this numerically. If you look carefully at the texture locator, we do have a transform section up here at the top that will allow us to interactively place where this texture is going to be showing up. However, here's the trick, and this is what I like to recommend people doing initially. Hit auto size. Auto size is going to go in and it's going to examine the polygon. It's going to figure out where that polygon is, and it's going to try to place that texture locator on top of our polygon. Okay? Auto size can be found right below the transform section, right there. There's auto size, and it's inside of our texture locator. Okay? So let's do it real fast. Auto size, boom. Now we're there. Okay? So the computer automatically figured out where that polygon was and moved the texture and, incidentally, the image to that location. Now we still have some changes that we can make. It doesn't look like it's exactly rotated correctly on the photograph. Okay, the author of this photograph has beautifully watermarked his image. If you look carefully down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the watermark. Okay, this is my buddy Dan. He took this photograph. All right, and if you look carefully, I would imagine that this line of text is perfectly straight. It really doesn't match the orientation of my picture, right? So what do I need to do to my photograph? Rotate it. I need to rotate it ever so slightly. And we can. This is where that texture, it's where the transform the transform section of my texture locator comes into play. Check it out. If I go over here to the rotation section, let's figure out which axes I'm going to rotate my object along. Just going to rotate it. Whoa, that's not right. Okay, check it out. You can see pretty quickly what's happening if we have the OpenGL viewport open down here in the bottom. You can see the texture locator, that little white outline. We need it to get in line with the black square behind it. So if I was to rotate it around the x-axis, you can see what's happening to the texture locator, and it looks like our image is just distorting like crazy. If we did it along the y-axis, yet again, we can kind of see that the plane of the texture locator is rotating the wrong way. So by a process of elimination, we can see that rotating this object along the z-axis will give us the result that we want. And if you look carefully at how the texture is being applied to my polygon up top, you can see this effect happening in front of you. Okay, pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. Now, if you don't, here's another kind of a neat thing, and this is another reason why the Modo rendering engine is incredibly powerful and designed for artists, okay? Sometimes working with numbers is hard, okay? I almost hate saying that. Working with numbers is stupid sometimes, okay? I'm an artist, not a mathematician, okay? I don't want to do things numerically. I want to do things visually. Since the texture locator is an item, do you think we can select it? Yeah. If we're in item mode, I can go in and select my texture locator. Check it out. Let's go into item mode real fast. At the top of the screen, I can change my selection sets. I'm going to choose item mode. Now you got to be really careful in what you select here. When I initially turned on item mode, there was a number of items that were automatically selected. I'm just going to very carefully mouse over the texture locator. It goes orange, okay? And now, if I hit the rotate tool, look what happens. Okay, I'm in control. Oops. Accidentally deselected it. I'm in control now. Let me grab Come on, sometimes my Wacom tablet just gets in the way. I'm in control of where my texture locator is placed within my scene. I can move it where I want it to go. I can scale it up and scale it down. And you can see that now the picture is getting bigger on the polygon. Let's make it smaller. It's now smaller in the polygon. So I'm in control at every step of the way. Okay? It's pretty cool. You're going to like working with the texture locators. Yeah? Yeah. I want to show you guys some really cool technology that we have in this classroom. I think I don't remember if it was this class or another class, but now's a perfect segue to introduce some really cool things that we're going to be using a lot in this class. So for me to help you guys work with your stuff, okay? Check it out. I got this really cool app. This is Big Brother. Absolutely. Big Brother has come home to roost. Okay, check it out. These are all your machines. And now I can look at every single machine in this room. Not only can I look at every single machine in this room, I can take over. At the bottom of all of your computer monitors, you have two little labels. On one side it says like, what does it say? It says CM110, then a whole bunch of gobbledygook, okay? And then the other side, the other label, it says CM110 student and then a number. Liam, can you find your computer number for me on the bottom of your monitor? Student what?
Student
22. 22. Let's give Liam a hand here. Here's student 22. Check it out. I can make it full screen. Okay, Liam, show me your problem.
All right, so as you can see, I would like to make my photo bigger so I can move it up here.
Move it up there. Okay, now up there in the upper right-hand corner of your corkboard, is that a separate item?
Well, as you can see in my layers here, it's titled photo.
Click on a different item to, yeah, okay, cool. Now, have you created a material group for those polygons on that layer?
Well, I have a texture group.
Okay. Have you created a material for it, though? Okay, go back into your photo layer for me real fast. Okay, now I want you to select the polygons that make up your photo. Now you're in item mode. Yep, good job. There it is. Clicky click. Okay. Here's what I also would like you to do. You can't select the polygons in the preview window. Okay, so click on that little arrow right there in the upper right-hand corner of the preview window. Yep, the yellow one. There it is. And now, downstairs in your OpenGL viewport, you can click on that polygon. Now you've gone into the corkboard. Go back to that photograph. Now, Liam, I want you to stop what you're doing just for 2 seconds, okay? Check it out. In your item list, click on the photo layer. Okay, now double-click on the polygons that represent the photograph. Yeah, those right there. Hit M. Create a new material. Call it Daisy Photograph or something, whatever you want. Perfect. Great. Awesome. Okay. Now, over in your shader tree, okay, take that Daisy photograph. Which one is it? Is it Review 2? Which photograph has that Daisy in it? Is it that one? Or that one? Or are they both that one? Okay. Let's make it drag and drop that photograph into your photograph base material group. Okay, over here in your shader tree. Over here in your shader tree. Yeah, there you go. Oop, grab the photograph. That one. Drag and drop it. No. Into the group that's immediately above it. Up. Keep going. That one right there. The photograph base. Hey, there it is. Okay. Now we got to influence the texture locator, right? So there's a couple ways we can do it. Here's what I would suggest that you do. Go right here to your texture locator tab. Hit auto size. Boink. Good job. Always use auto size first, okay? 9 times out of 10, auto size is going to do all the heavy lifting and figure out the position and scale values pretty quickly for you. Most of the times, whenever the only edit you'll have to make afterwards is rotating it to make sure the rotation matches, okay? All right. So let me show you something else that's kind of neat. In addition to being able to, yeah, here's a great example. In addition to being able to view your image, I can also say, yeah, you're done. And I can control your computer too. So please be careful on what you're doing, okay? Be very careful. Hey, what are you doing? Let's check it out. Awesome. Looking at some cool images. Very neat. So please be careful. Big Brother's watching. In addition, Big Brother can also control your machines, okay? Everyone stop what you're doing real fast. No soup for you. Here, I'll give it back to you. There you go. Yeah. What computer number are you, Mr. Pryor? 5? Student what? 6. Okay. Let's take a look.
I want to turn this photo into a glossy photo.
Into a glossy photo. So if you want to change the reflectivity of that photo, that's a material setting. So I can see in your shader tree here you have fair odd parents. Is that the photograph?
Yep.
Go into the material right below it. There you go. And in, you got it.
Wow.
So that might be me. That might be because I'm spying on you. The form isn't refreshing, so let me get out of there. And just increase the reflectivity amount on that material.
Oh, yeah, that was you. Okay.
Yeah, Roberto, what's up?
So if you have a cube, if you want to put like different pictures on the side.
A little bit more of a challenge. Actually, much larger challenge. I think for today, to keep it simple, have each polygon on that cube be separated in its own material. That way we can control each surface of the cube separately from one another. Okay. All right, let's get back. So I have a couple more. Let's do a couple more of these together as a class, and then we'll start working on our lab. Okay. I want to make. Let's do some more in here. Let's do it again. Okay. I want to place a photograph on this little post-it note. So if I right-click on it, I can quickly find the material that's responsible. I just happen to name it post-it note. So walk me through the process of adding an image map into this material group. What's the first thing I got to do? Add layer. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Add layer inside the shader tree. Add layer. Image map. Now, which of these are we going to choose? Load image. And now we got to navigate to the location that this image is currently residing in on your machine. Here it is. Here's mine. Okay, rock and roll. Now we're not done yet. We got to change it. We got to edit our image map. What do we have to do to edit our image map? Yeah, we got to go over to that texture locator. Okay, texture locator. And what do we need to change within the texture locator? UV map, the projection type. We need to change the rules that the computer is using to blast this image onto the polygon. Which rule do we want to use? Planar. There we go. If we look at the image now, it's repeating over and over and over again. How do I stop it from repeating? You can use auto size, but that's not going to stop it from repeating. Yeah, horizontal and vertical repeat. Turn both of those to reset. There we go. Turn the vertical repeat to reset. Now we have one, and now we hit auto size. Now we hit auto size, and it's going to get us where we need to go. If I go in and adjust the rotation value of my texture along the Z, I can kind of tweak it a little bit and make it perfect. Okay? Let's do it one more time. Let's do it one more time for the post-it note behind, okay? For this one over here, there's post-it note number 3. Add layer, image map, load image, okay? Little shopping list, okay? My wife often makes me lists to make sure I remember what I need to do, okay? So texture locator, we need to change the rules from UV map to planar. Let's turn off the repeat by toggling the horizontal and vertical repeat to reset and make it fit within the texture by hitting auto size. Okay? Let's rotate it along the z-axis ever so slightly to align the image perfectly to the orientation of my polygon. Here we go. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. You're going to be basically rinsing and repeating these steps for all of the posters within your scene. Okay? It's the exact same thing over and over and over again. Yeah. It's just kind of not working. Let's help Mr. Button out. What computer are you, Quinn? Number 7. Let's look at number 7. Okay. Mr. Button is interfacing with a kind of a quirk. Okay. If you look at what Quinn is seeing here, what he is working with, or where he is working within, is the OpenGL viewport. Okay. You're really not going to see the effects of the texture placement correctly in OpenGL. See this little banding here? That's a problem. Okay. It's a big, big problem. I can also see that the orientation of your scene is a little off. Okay, check it out. His compass is kind of wacky right now. His corkboard is, I think, facing the wrong direction within the scene, so we need to change the projection axis. Quinn, would you mind if I took over for a second? Let's check it out. All right, now I'm driving. Now, I like to do all of my work inside of perspective. Yeah, now he modeled his corkboard, and this is not wrong, but he modeled his corkboard kind of along what I would call the ground, okay, instead of vertical like on a wall. So if you modeled, since he modeled his on the ground, we have to change the axis that our texture is being broadcasted or blasted down. So check it out. Under the projection type, of course, we have the planar projection type, but we also have the projection axis. Mine was on a vertical wall, so the z-axis is working. We probably want yours on the y. That way, yep, it's going correctly. So play around with your projection axis if you're not getting the right result. Okay? And thank you for stealing an image from the website. I appreciate that. I'm joking. Steal away, my friends. Steal away. All right. Okay. All right, I want to show you one other thing, and this is nothing more than a tease of what's to come. Okay, texture maps play a big role inside of the Modo rendering pipeline. Okay, in addition to allowing us to place specific photographs on specific polygons, we could also use texture maps to create some pretty cool effects. If you remember earlier, I had a big purple polygon sitting in my scene. Here it is. Ta-da! Huzzah. All right. Big purple polygon. And I've already applied an image map to that purple polygon using the exact same production technique that I just showed you. Identical. Nothing's changed. Okay? However, the end result of this operation is not what I want it to be. I don't want to see the purple edges, right? I want to have this polygon perfectly match the border of my little torn out piece of paper. Okay? Now, I could go in and model it. I could. That would take forever, right? To model a polygon that perfectly matches the border of that. No, I'm not doing that. Okay? Especially when I have the power of Modo in my back pocket. Image maps allow us to create some pretty exciting effects. Okay? Up until now, what we've been toggling and what we've been working with over in the shader tree, or excuse me, what the image maps have been influencing in our shader tree is the diffuse color value. Okay? In essence, we're overriding the diffuse color value when we bring in an image map. Okay? Let me go find my newspaper. There it is down below. But we can change this effect. We don't necessarily have to have my newspaper image affecting just the diffuse color value. I can change the rules a little bit. I can change the effect that this image is having along these polygons and create something that's a little bit more appealing. Changing the effect of any image map inside of Modo is really easy. Notice that our shader tree is broken out into 2 columns. We have a column that says name, where we've been working with up until now, okay? And then we also have another column called effect. I'm going to right-click on the word diffuse color in the effect column, and you can see all the different shading effects that we have access to, and there is a bunch, okay? There is a lot of different effects, a lot. Some of these we're going to become quite familiar with. Others I haven't even touched, okay? Like volumetric absorption color. I don't know what that is, okay? I mean, there are some really, really advanced effects in here that will allow you to create some pretty stunning results. As a tease for the upcoming weeks, check this action out, okay? I'm going to go in to Special Effects, and I'm going to change my effect to RGBA. And the A is the most important thing, because A stands for alpha channel. If you've taken one of our Photoshop classes, you know that an alpha channel is really a 4th image channel, a 4th color channel that toggles transparency on the other 3, okay? Well, within this effect, we're accessing that transparency channel, and we're using that transparency information to affect the surface of our model, okay? Check it out. Notice that at the moment, my image map with the diffuse color value applied, we can see the edges of my polygon. They're purple, okay? No, I like the purple. I only want to see the polygon, or I don't want to see those purple edges, okay? Check this action out. If I change the effect from diffuse color to RGBA, now we're only seeing the polygon where the image map resides. We basically have masked a polygon with an image. Awesome. Yeah, now there's some problems with it. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, David. Yes, there are some issues in there that I need to fix, okay? And I don't know how, I don't know how that piece of paper is being held up at the moment. I need to change the location of one of my thumbtacks. Okay? But it just kind of illustrates what we can do, okay? The Modo rendering engine is amazing. It allows you to make some pretty complex and awesome effects, okay? All right, real quick. Just want to kind of revisit our homework assignment this week, make sure everyone's on the same page. If we go back to renderography and inside the Creating Materials and Textures assignment sheet, let's go to the homework tab and let's take a look at what we're going to be doing for this week's homework assignment. Okay, this week's homework assignment, This week's homework assignment is really kind of fun. As I mentioned, it's a continuation of where we left off last week. You should already have the geometry for your corkboard done. Now it's time to go put some images and textures on those pieces of geometry to make it come to life. So, a couple things that we're extending or adding into this assignment from last week. You should already have the corkboard, the paper flyers, and the thumbtacks already done. Okay? Now we're going to go in and apply materials and textures to the remainder of the scene. So we have separate materials for all items in the scene. Texture maps applied to all posters, flyers, or postcards, whatever you have on your board itself. Every single item on your board, okay, needs to have an image on it, minus the thumbtacks. Obviously, we're not going to put an image on a thumbtack, okay? Global illumination is on, and then, here's a new one, okay? Change in the frame size on you. We're no longer going to be rendering our frames at the default size. We're going to make it bigger. Let's talk about how we can adjust the frame size to 1280 by 720. Let's check it out. It's really easy to do over in Modo, and it happens in the shader tree. So to change the frame size, the physical size of the image that's generated, I need you to click on the purple render sphere. Okay? By clicking on it, we're going to bring open a whole bunch of properties that's going to influence the actual render itself. And like most things in Modo, we have a whole series of vertical tabs here. FYI, if you want to go in and start monkeying with the global illumination system, here's where you find it inside the render settings. But specifically, what we want to focus on is this frame tab. Because as you can see, we have a frame width and a frame height. This is where we need to change to 1280 by 720. Okay, you're going to find that the aspect ratio of your image is going to change. At 720 by 480, we're at an aspect ratio of 4 by 3, so it's just barely rectangular, just barely rectangular. And at 1280 by 720, we're now working at a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And if for those of you that are broadcast enabled, if you have a little bit of experience working in the broadcast industry, you may recognize these numbers because this is the frame width and height for 720p HD television. Okay? So we're going to be rendering everything going forward at 1280 by 720. And really, you want to start rendering everything like this, okay? It's going to give you a really nice image that you can have on your portfolio. You can put it online. When it's at 720 by 480, it's like the size of a postage stamp. Now we physically have an image that's bigger, more pixels. It's going to take a little bit longer to render, but it's something that's of higher quality and something that you're going to want to show people when you're done. So it's going to be pretty cool going forward, all right? So don't forget, it's in the frame tab, the frame, and we're changing the frame width and the height. That's the only thing we're changing, okay? In addition, don't forget that at the conclusion of every render, you're going to be saving out a JPEG. So let me render my scene real fast by hitting F9 or the gigantic render button at the top of the screen. So there's my render. It's cruising through. It's a little bit bigger in size, so it's taking a little bit longer to render. We're physically drawing more pixels now. So there it is. It's just going to cruise through. Bum, ba-da-da. Bum, 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 bum. Ooh, there it is. Okay. So what do we do now? We've rendered it. Have we saved it? No, we got to save image, right? Don't forget to save your image. Okay. And it's real easy to forget to do this. Save image. Okay. Just click on it once. It'll open. Everything in here gets saved as a JPEG. The defaults may be something different than JPEG. 9 times out of 10, it is something different than JPEG. Yeah, some machines are Targas. On mine, it's PNG. I'm a PNG guy. I love the PNG file format. Other computers on campus, they're TIFFs. So we're saving things as JPEGs. Okay, JPEGs. This makes the file size pretty small. It'll retain 90% of the quality, so it's not going to look any worse, and it's just easier to manage going forward. Okay, JPEGs, JPEGs, JPEGs. Question? I saw a hand. No? Okay. All right. So that's your homework assignment for this week, to texture your corkboard. Your lab assignment this week is really fun. I like this lab assignment. I've given you the scene file that you're going to work with. If you go back to the website, under the resources section, you need to download and save this project file to your personal thumb drive, hard drive, or cloud storage device of your choosing. Okay? I've already downloaded it to my machine, so let me open it up in Modo and let's take a look-see at it. Okay? Okay. Come on, hit the open button, Pat. All right, so here's the scene. It's already modeled for you. It's a really great scene. I didn't model this, so I can't take credit for it. It's one of those. It's a scene that's been floating around the 3D community for a number of years. Okay. Your job this week in the lab assignment is to take this scene and to apply textures to every single polygon within the scene. Okay. I don't care about it being, all I care about is color. So the grass doesn't need to be grass. But if you would like it to be grass, do it. Absolutely. I'm not going to say no. The minimum expectations is just to go in and colorize all of the polygons and make them look how you want to look. Okay? There's a lot of work in here to be done. Remember the process of selecting and then applying materials to those polygons. Yes, sir? So when you download the Lighthouse scene from the website, it's going to download as a zipped archive, right? If you double click on that zipped archive, it's going to extract the LXO and then just open the LXO over in Modo. Okay? Here's what the model file looks like. Yeah. Okay. What computer number are you, Liam? Yeah, you're on the wrong week there, Liam. It's the topmost one. Resources. There it is. Okay, open it up. You're on your way. Okay. So here's your scene file, by the way. Okay. And I just want to remind you guys and kind of just illustrate that a lot of these objects are broken out into their own mesh items. Please make sure that you're on the mesh item that you want to apply materials on. Okay, this can be a frustrating thing for people if they're sitting on the the lighthouse mesh item and they're trying to select the water. It's not going to work. Okay, you got to be on the correct item in order to access those polygons. Yes, sir.
Those colors have to be accurate. We make like
You can make the ocean orange. No, I don't care. Nice. You can make the sky green and the grass blue. Doesn't make a difference to me. Okay, one other thing that is a requirement for this project. You are going to be rendering both of these, or you're going to be rendering this at 1280 by 720, okay? So 1280 by 720. However, you're going to be crafting two renders, okay? So at the conclusion of this project, you're going to be submitting 3 things to the Dropbox on D2L. Your Luxology project file that contains all your work, and then 2 separate renders, okay? Each one of these renders needs to be from an alternating angle. One of the cool things about working with really cool scenes like this is that we get to become kind of like really groovy little digital photographers, okay? I want you to go in and find some compelling angles here to render your scene. I want to give you a couple suggestions though. Okay? When I say compelling angles, I don't mean that. Okay? If you turn in a project file where the render looks like this, okay? Okay, if this is what your render looks like, fail. Okay? This is not a compelling render, okay? So please make sure that you're getting all up in there. I mean, you got a lot of cool geometry in here, okay? So take advantage of it. There's some neat things in here that will allow you to make some really cool pictures. In addition, let me find my lighthouse real fast. I'm working in an uncolored text environment. There we go. In addition, an alternating angle, okay? So that's a good render. Nice picture of a lighthouse, okay? So you got to make a second one. This is not an acceptable alternating angle. When I mean alternating angles, I mean a completely opposite perspective of your environment. So if you give me that shot as a render and then that one as a render, fail. Be creative. Explore this environment. Find parts of this little island that will allow you to take a pretty picture. Okay? This is supposed to be a fun, creative assignment that just gets us into a really complex scene, apply some materials, and start to become better at rendering things. Okay? Questions on what we're doing for our lab assignment? Questions? Mr. Pryor.
I might be getting ahead, but I've seen it done before where you could take the actual environment, you take a picture and turn that picture into the actual environment.
We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week. We're going to keep it really simple this time out. Okay? Kellen. Okay, no problem. So we got about, let's see, we got about 25 minutes left in class. Let's get to work. Okay, let's get to work.